There is a question almost nobody asks themselves, and it is the most important question you will ever face. Where does your sense of worth actually come from? Not who you say you are when someone asks. Not the version of yourself you perform in public. The real answer. The quiet answer. The one that only shows up in the moment someone criticizes you, ignores you, or walks away. Most people never examine this question, and because they never examine it, they build their entire identity on something they were never actually given control over. Other people's opinions. A stranger's comment. A friend's mood that day. A room full of people who forget you the second you leave. That is the foundation most people live their whole life standing on, and it is exactly why so many people feel like they are constantly one bad conversation away from falling apart. The Stoics discovered something different almost 2,000 years ago, and it is one of the most quietly radical ideas in the history of human thought. They discovered a foundation that cannot be taken from you. Not because no one will ever try. People will always try. But because the foundation itself does not live in a place anyone else can reach. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. Armies moved because he gave the order. Every single day of his life, he was surrounded by people whose purpose was to tell him he was right. Flattery was not occasional in his world. It was constant. If there was ever a man who had every incentive to let his identity be built by the opinions of others, it was him, because those opinions were relentlessly, professionally positive. And yet, isolated, exhausted, dealing with betrayal from people he trusted, he sat down at night and wrote to himself. Not for anyone else. Not for publication. He wrote in a private journal meant for an audience of exactly one person. Himself. He constantly returned to his own judgment, his own principles, checking himself against a standard that lived inside him rather than a standard handed to him by the crowd around him. He did not chase applause, even though it was available to him effortlessly. He did not collapse under criticism either. Both of those things come from the exact same root. A standard that lives outside yourself. He refused that root entirely, and built something almost nobody around him had. A version of himself that did not shift shape depending on who was in the room. Now let's make that personal. If you need praise to feel confident, you are fragile. If you need agreement to feel secure, you are unstable. If you need respect to feel worthy, you are dependent on people who do not owe you anything. Nobody owes you their respect. If your entire sense of worth is renting space inside someone else's judgment, you have handed the deed of your own identity to a landlord who never agreed to the lease. But here is the alternative. Build your identity on character instead of opinion, and you become steady. Not steady for a week. Steady permanently. Character is built internally, through choices made when nobody is watching. Opinion is handed out externally, by strangers, at random. One you control completely. The other controls you completely. There is no comfortable middle ground. This is where Epictetus enters, and he asked one question that ends an entire lifetime of unnecessary suffering. If someone calls you lame, and it happens to be true, why would you be upset? And if it happens to be false, why would you be upset either way? If the criticism is accurate, there is nothing to be upset about. You now have information that lets you improve. Being upset does not undo the truth, it only adds suffering on top of a fact that was already there. And if the criticism is inaccurate, there is also nothing to be upset about. It was never true to begin with. Why would a false statement have the power to change how you feel about yourself? So where exactly is the suffering required? It is not required. It is optional. This brings us to the difference between ego and character, two completely separate systems running inside every human being. Ego demands reputation. It wants to look good, to win the argument, to be seen a certain way. When someone insults you, your ego panics immediately, because its entire survival depends on maintaining an image. Character demands something different. Discipline. It is quiet, and almost entirely unconcerned with how things look from the outside. When someone insults a person who has built their identity on character, they do not ask how do I fix how this looks. They ask a completely different question. Is my character intact? If it is, no insult has actually damaged anything real. You might still feel a flash of anger, a moment of heat. Being human means you are not immune to sensation. But your foundation stays unshaken, because it was never built on their opinion in the first place. There was nothing for the insult to knock down, because it was never load-bearing. Here is something most people never admit to themselves. There is enormous quiet strength in being okay with being misread. Most people panic the moment someone misunderstands them. They rush to clarify, to justify, to convince. But convincing is often just a polished form of seeking, and seeking is dependency wearing a nicer outfit. The emotionally solid person does not need to convince anyone of anything. They state their position briefly, if necessary, or say nothing at all, and move forward. Presence is felt before it is ever understood. Walk into a room without needing anyone's validation, and people feel it instantly, even if they cannot explain why. Refuse to flinch at an insult, and people hesitate before trying you again. That hesitation is power. Think about two houses built on different ground. One on sand near the shoreline, one on solid rock further inland. On a calm day, both look the same. Both stand. The difference only becomes visible when a storm arrives. The house on sand shifts and sometimes collapses, because the ground underneath was never actually solid, only temporarily still. The house on rock holds, not because the storm does not reach it, but because what is underneath it does not move regardless of what happens above. Identity built on opinion is the house on sand. It can look fine for years, especially when life is cooperative. But the moment a real storm arrives, a public criticism, a betrayal, a sudden unfair rejection, the instability that was always quietly there becomes visible to everyone, including the person standing inside. Identity built on character is the house on rock. Storms still come. Insults still happen. But the structure itself does not move when they arrive, because it was never resting on the same ground. Here is the deeper truth underneath all of this. The strongest people are not the ones who feel nothing when they are criticized or misunderstood. That is not strength, that is numbness. The strongest people are the ones who feel something, notice it clearly, and then choose what to do with it, rather than being dragged along by it automatically. Character over reputation. Discipline over approval. This is not a slogan meant to sound inspiring for 30 seconds and then be forgotten. It is a practical, livable foundation, tested through some of the most difficult circumstances a human being can face. And left behind for anyone willing to actually build it rather than simply admire it. It is available to you starting today, in the very next interaction where someone says something that stings. Not because the sting disappears immediately. It will not. But because you now have a question to ask in that moment. Is my character intact? If it is, nothing that just happened has the power you were about to hand it. Feeling something is not the same as being destabilized by it. A person with a strong internal foundation can feel anger, embarrassment, even genuine hurt, and still remain fundamentally unmoved underneath all of it. The same way a house built on rock can feel wind and rain against its walls without ever questioning whether it will still be standing tomorrow. That is the actual target. Not numbness. Not pretending nothing affects you. A version of yourself that can feel the full weight of a difficult moment honestly, while still knowing, underneath all of it, exactly who you are. Regardless of what anyone else in that moment happened to think. That knowing is not given to you. It is built, deliberately, one quiet, unwitnessed choice at a time, in exactly the way Marcus Aurelius built his, writing to an audience of one. Standing on a foundation nobody else could ever fully see, and nobody else could ever take away.